The first time the forest said my name, it used my mother's voice. I was halfway down the old logging trail when I heard it, soft at first, almost swallowed by the rain. A woman's voice drifting between the black pines behind me. Elias. I stopped so suddenly the beam of my flashlight shook across the trees. The woods around me were drenched in late October cold, all wet bark and shiny needles, the trail slick with mud and rotting leaves. It was nearly dark, the kind of dark that came early under storm clouds, where the evening didn't fade so much as close around you. I stood there listening to the rain tap softly on my hood, to my own breathing, to the creak of branches rubbing together somewhere high above. Then it came again. Elias. Not shouted, not panicked, just familiar, intimate, as if she were only a few steps away. My mother had been dead for 14 years. I told myself what anyone would tell themselves. The mind is cruel in lonely places. The forest was full of strange acoustics. The storm, the wind, memory, those things could shape sound into something recognizable if you were tired enough, if you were already half looking over your shoulder before you heard it. And I was tired. I'd been hiking 4 hours through the national forest on a trail no one used anymore, trying to reach the fire lookout my grandfather used to talk about when I was a kid. Raven. Watch. He used to describe it in the hush people reserve for church confessions and family curses. A lookout built before the war. A cabin balanced on a rocky rise in the middle off miles and miles of timber, where men once watched for smoke and counted lightning strikes. Then he would always go quiet. My father would change the subject. My mother would set her glass down too hard. When I was 12, I asked why nobody in the family ever went there anymore. My grandfather looked at me for a long time. His eyes clouded and yellowed at the corners and said, "Because the forest keeps what learns your name." At 12, that sounded like one more old country superstition. The kind old men carried around with bad knees and dead friends. At 32, with his funeral behind me and a half-empty bottle of his pills still rattling in my coat pocket because I hadn't been able to throw them away yet. It sounded different. Not true. Just heavier. I adjusted the backpack on my shoulders and kept walking. The trail narrowed until it was hardly a trail at all, just a wounded line through thundergrowth. Ferns brushed my knees. Wet branches caught on my sleeves. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Not silent. Worse than silent. The forest still made sound, water dripping from cedar boughs, the far-off groan of trunks shifting in the wind, but there were no birds, no insect chorus, no rustle of animals fleeing my approach. It felt less like a living place than a room in which something had recently stopped breathing. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. The screen reflected my face for a moment, rain-speckled beard, sunken eyes. The drawn look grief gives a person when it's still new enough to embarrass them in public. I'd told people this trip was about clearing my head, honoring family history, getting away for the weekend. The truth was uglier. 3 nights after the funeral, I woke at 2:13 a.m. in the morning to hear knocking coming from inside my apartment walls. Not pipes, not neighbors. Knocking. Slow. As if someone were trapped just behind the drywall, moving room to room with me. The second night it happened, I heard my own name whispered from the heating vent in the bedroom. The third night, I opened the hallway closet and found a line carved into the inside of Theodore in fresh splinters. Raven Wachi had never told anyone about that. Not my ex-wife, who still called twice a week out of pity or habit. Not my sister, who had enough to carry with Grandpa's death and the estate. Not my friends, who already looked at me too carefully when I paused too long in conversation, as if grief were contagious and they were listening for it in themselves. I packed a bag the next morning and drove north. Now the rain thickened, whispering through the branches in sheets. The logging trail bent to fill. My thighs burned. Fog clung low to the ground, winding around roots and fallen logs like something thinking its way toward me. Every so often I caught an odor beneath the cold, wet smell of pine, something sweet and spoiled, like flowers left too long in standing water. I told myself I was close. Then I saw the first sign that I should have turned back. Nailed to a tree at shoulder height was a child's shoe. It was old, leather gone black with mildew, the laces hanging stiff and green with moss. A rusted nail had been driven straight through the sole into the trunk. Rain ran from the toe in thin red-brown streaks. I stood there staring at it, my flashlight beam unwavering now because something deeper than fear had steadied me. A single shoe in the middle of the forest could mean anything. Hunters played pranks. Teenagers vandalized trails. People were strange. People left pieces of themselves in wild places for reasons that made sense only to them. Then I swept light to the next tree. Another shoe dot smaller. Then the next dot and the next. A line of them disappearing into the dark. One on each trunk, nailed at even height on either side of the path like markers or warnings or trophies. Children's shoes, boots, slippers. A teeny sneaker with cartoon stars faded almost white. Some looked decades old. Some looked new enough that the colors still showed through the damp. The trail rose between them like a throat. I should have left. Instead, I kept walking, because fear does that. Sometimes it doesn't always make urine. Sometimes it narrows your world until the only thing you can do is continue. Because a turning around means admitting that the thing ahead of you is real. The shoes went on for what felt like miles. As I passed them, I started noticing other things. Scraps of cloth tied high in branches. Bits off antler dangling from twine. Flat river stones stacked 3 and 4 high on stumps that could not possibly have held them steady through wind and weather. Once, in the edge off me flashlight beam, I saw what I thought was a person standing between the trees off the trail, a thin shape in gray. Head bowed, I swung the light toward it, a dead birch trunk. I laughed under my breath then too sharply, and immediately regretted making any sound at all. The path opened without warning onto a clearing of slick stone, and waist-high grass flattened by rain. And there it was. Raven Watch stood on a rise of black rock above the tree line. Old as a memory and just as swarped. The lookout tower leaned slightly to one side, its support silver with rot, its stairway climbing in a zigzag toward a square cabin of weathered boards and blind windows. The roof had sagged in the middle. One of the railings hung broken. The whole structure looked less abandoned than forgotten by time itself, something that should have collapsed years ago but had not been permitted to. Lightning flashed somewhere distant, whitening the sky for half a second. In that instant I saw writing covering the lower supports of the tower. Names. Hundreds of them. Carved into the wood. Cut deep, layered atop one another, old scars intersecting new ones until the beams looked skinned. My light swept across them as I approached. Some were full names, some only initials, some so weathered they were almost gone. I saw dates going back 50 years. More. Maybe longer. A few names had been crossed out. Not neatly. With a line. With gouges. The rain ran into the cuts and made them look fresh. I found my grandfather's name on the third beam I checked. Martin Vale, 1968 under it, almost hidden by swelling wood and lichen. Another name, Clara Vale, 1968, my mother. I took a step back so hard my boot slipped on the rock. She would have been 6 years old in 1968. For a moment I could only hear my pulse. It filled my ears, drowned the rain, made the whole clearing seem to tilt. My mother had never once mentioned this place except to say, whenever Grandpa started one of his stories, "Don't talk about that around the children." She hated camping, hated the smell of pine sap, hated even driving through dense woods with the windows down. Once during a storm when I was 9, the power went out and she started crying in the kitchen because she thought she heard someone calling outside. I had forgotten that until that moment, or maybe I had chosen to. My flashlight beam drifted lower. In wood so fresh it was still pale inside the cuts, was Ather. Lias Valino date. I don't remember climbing the stairs. Later I could recall my hand gripping the wet railing, the wood slick and soft under my palm. I could remember each step groaning beneath my weight, the whole structure swaying faintly with the wind. But the span between seeing my name and reaching the top was gone. As if the tower had swallowed it whole, the cabin door was hanging half open. Inside, the air smelled of mildew, old ash, and something else underneath, animal maybe, or human, or both after enough time. My light found a rusted stove in one corner, Anaro cot collapsed inward, shelves thick with dust, walls covered in more carvings. Names again. Not random, ordered. Listed in cramped vertical rows like records kept by Somione, obsessive and very patient. Rain rattled on the roof, overhead. I stepped inside. The floorboards bowed but held. There was a metal box on the small table under the front window. Army green once, nomadled with rust. Beside it lay a leather-bound notebook swollen with damp. Me grandfather's initials had been pressed into the cover. MV. My mouth went dry. I reached for the notebook first. The leather felt cold enough to hurt. When I opened it, several pages tore loose at once and drifted to the floor. The handwriting inside was his tight, angular, unmistakable. I turned to the first readable entry. It has started using Clara's voice now. It only does that when it knows it will be believed. I read that line 3 times before my mind accepted it. The next lines crawled over the page. The mistake is not hearing it. Mistake is answering. The mistake is letting it teach itself the shape of your love, the cabin. Creaked around me. Something tapped lightly against the outer wall. A branch. 3 taps. Deliberate. Knuckles on wood. I froze. Another tap sounded at the opposite wall. Then another overhead. Moving around the cabin. My flashlight beam trembled across the boards. The stove, the broken cot, the wet black square of the open doorway behind me. Rain still fell, but underneath it I could hear something else, now soft impacts on the tower stairs below. Weight ascending 1 step at a time. I set the notebook down and opened the metal box with fingers that suddenly didn't feel like mine. Inside was a bundle of yellowed papers tied with twine. An old compass with the glass cracked, a revolver wrapped in cloth, and at the very bottom, a cassette tape labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. For Elias, if IT learns you, do not let IT inside. My breath stopped in my chest. From just outside the half-open door, inches away, my mother's voice whispered, "Baby, open it. It's cold out here." Then the door, which had been hanging inward all this time, began to move slowly, as if someone on the other side had placed a hand against it and was pushing their way in. The door opened 3 inches, then stopped. Rain hissed through the gap. Cold air spilled across the floorboards, carrying the smell I had been catching all the way up the mountain, that sweet, rotted scent like flour steeping in old water. I stood with the revolver in one hand and the flashlight in the other, unable to move, unable even to breathe properly, while my mother's voice waited just outside the door. "Elias," it said gently, "please." There are moments when your body knows the truth before your mind does. Mine knew. Not because the voice was wrong. That would have been easier. It was perfect. The exact softness she used when I had fevers as a child. The exact lift at the end of my name. Wench was half amused and half worried. It wasn't wrong at all. They was too right. Dead things, if they came back, were supposed to come back damaged, cold, hollow. But whatever stood outside that door had shaped her voice with loving precision, the way a skilled forger paints every vein in a copied hand. There was something in that accuracy that made my skin crawl harder than any snarl or growl could have. I backed away 1 step. The door moved another inch. "Don't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure whether I was talking to it or to myself. To pause. Then from outside, in my mother's voice, "You came all this way for me." The words struck like a palm against my chest.
I tasted metal.
For 1 swaying second, the cabin vanished, and I was 8 years old again, standing in the doorway of my parents' bedroom after a thunderstorm, watching my mother sit upright in the dark with both hands clamped over her ears.
"Mom?"
Her face had been white with sweat. My father was beside her, trying to calm her, and I remember how quickly he turned when he saw me there, too quickly, like a man caught doing something shameful. My mother looked at me, eyes wide and glassy, and said, "Did you call me?" I had shaken my head. She kept staring. Then she asked, in a voice unlike herself at all, "Are you sure?" At the time I thought she was overtired. Adults had spells. Adults were allowed to explain terrors as long as they hid them badly enough from children. Now, in the fire lookout, with rain shivering through the doorframe and my dead mother speaking from the darkness outside, I understood that memory in a new and horrible way. The thing beyond the door had never only known my grandfather. It had known her too. My flashlight passed over the notebook again. I snatched it up, keeping the revolver trained on the widening gap. The pages were damp and brittle, the ink feathered in places. But my grandfather had written with the furious discipline of a man documenting something he believed would outlive him. Another knock sounded from the wall to my left. Then one from beneath the floor. Something was circling the cabin. I turned pages. September 14. It has learned that grief opens quicker than fear. Fear makes a person run. Grief makes him listen. September 16. Clara heard her brother in the trees at dusk. She was halfway to the ridge before I called her. I had to slap her to make her stop. She would not speak to me for 2 days. Better that than burying her empty. The next entry was harder to read. The paper had been wrinkled and dried again, as if it had once gotten soaked. A dark stain spread across the lower half of the page. September 18. There are rules. I am writing them because I have started forgetting things at the wrong time, and I do not know if that is age, lack of sleep, or the place itself pressing on the mind. Under that was a numbered list. I crouched behind the table, revolver shaking in my hand, and read by flashlight while Thething outside the cabin dragged my mother's voice softly across my name. 1. Do not answer when it calls you from beyond your sight. 2. Do not follow any voice deeper into the trees after sunset. 3. If you hear someone you love asking to be let in, bar the door and wait for dawn. 4. Never speak your full name aloud on the mountain. 5. If you see yourself among the trees, leave the place you are standing and do not look back. 6. If the knocking begins beneath the floorboards, one of the names has opened. The tapping under the floor came again. Not tapping. 3 slow knocks from directly beneath my boots. My stomach turned over. Outside the door, my mother said, Elias, you know I hated the cold. The tone had changed very slightly. A threat of hurt now. An appeal. It was using memory-like fingers searching for a lock. I forced myself back to the notebook. 7. If it knows your mother's voice, it has known your blood before you. 8. If you find your name carved here before you carve it yourself, you were expected. My eyes jumped to the pale, fresh letters I had seen outside on the support beam.
My name.
New wood inside old scars. Expected. A sound rose from the stairway beneath the cabin. Wet footfalls.
Slow.
Climbing. I aimed the revolver at the doorway. The footsteps reached the landing outside and stopped. The door opened another inch. In the crack between wood and frame there should have been darkness. Rain, maybe the blurred edge of a shoulder or a hand. Instead I saw an eye, not my mother's eye. Not human at all. It was set too deep, round and glistening like something grown underwater. A pale membrane slid sideways over it once, soundlessly. The skin around it was gray-white and slick, stretched tight as if pulled over the wrong shape beneath. The eye looked directly at me. Then it blinked in the exact rhythm my mother used to when she was trying not to cry. I fired. The gunshot in the cabin was apocalyptic. Light burst from the barrel. My ears rang with instant pain. The shot tore through the doorframe beside the eye, showering splinters inward. The eye vanished. Outside, something moved so quickly the whole porch shuddered under it, not recoiling, not fleeing, but flowing sideways across the wall with odd scraping sound. As if it had too many joints and no difficulty deciding which to use. Then my mother laughed, not outside, inside my head. The sound was so intimate and impossible that I cried out and clapped a hand to my ear. The revolver nearly fell. When I looked down, the notebook was open to another page I hadn't turned. The entry there was written larger, harder. The pen strokes engraved deep into the paper. It enters by resemblance first, then by invitation, then by memory. Below that, as if written later in much shakier hand, if you are reading this. It may already be inside you. The room tilted. I backed into the wall, breathing through my teeth, and made myself think. Panic is hunger. Places like this feed on it. Grandpa had known that. The notebook was proof of method, proof of duration. This was not chaos. It was a trap with habits. Maybe rules. Maybe weaknesses. I swept a beam over the rest of the room. On the far wall, beside the rows of names, hung a yellowed Forest Service map behind cracked glass. A red circle had been drawn around the lookout. Around it, in a radius maybe 2 miles wide, my grandfather had marked symbols and pencil X's, dots. Arrows. Near the northern ridge he had written one word in block capitals. Mouth at the base of the tower. Here's best here and farther downslope. Near what looked like a creek bend, first call rain slammed against the roof harder now. The storm was directly overhead. Underrolled so close the window rattled in its frame. With each flash of lightning the cabin leaped white and black again, white and black, turning every object into a stuttered apparition. I found another note tucked into the back cover of the notebook. Not one of Grandpa's usual entries. A loose page folded twice. I opened it. This one was in my mother's handwriting. I knew it instantly. The loops too careful, the pressure uneven where her hand always satched in cold weather. My heart gave one heavy, painful beat. Dad, I heard it by the creek this morning. It was using my voice first, then yours. I think it wanted me to answer myself.
I know how foolish that sounds, but I am writing it because I am frightened of what I will forget later.
I dreamed last night that there were people standing between the trees, all facing away from me. I knew one of them was me before I saw her face. You said not to write my full name.
So I won't. I keep thinking the mountain is listening whenever we speak. I keep thinking it likes us best when we are sad.
There was no signature, just a smear at the bottom of the page, as if she had dragged her hand through wet ink while folding it away. A crash hit the outer wall with enough force to shake dust from the rafters. The door flew inward 6 inches. Stopped by the rusted leg of the stove, I saw a hand slap against the edge of it. At least it looked like a hand for the first second. Then the beam of my flashlight steadied and the details came clear. It had too many knuckles. The fingers were long and pale, with nails like softened bark, and the skin was ridged with fine, dark lines that resembled grain in wet wood. Water ran off it in thin threads. One finger bent backward with a soft popping sound and then slowly righted itself. The hand withdrew. A voice came from just below the threshold now. Low and close, no longer trying to sound exactly like my mother. It was trying several voices at once and failing to separate them. Let me in. Elias. Please, Dad, it's cold. Don't leave me here. Open. Every line was spoken a fraction after the last, layered so tightly they made a trembling chord of human need. Men, women, children. Young, old. Some crying. Some patient. Some angry. I heard my own voice among them and nearly dropped the flashlight. I stumbled backward until my calves struck the cot. My light jerked across the room and caught something scratched into the floorboards beneath the bed frame. The circle, so many circles, drawn over each other, scored into the wood with a knife. Inside them, names.
My grandfather.
My mother's half-written, others I didn't know. The grooves were blackened as if burned. There was another line in the notebook, penciled in the margin beside the rules, so faint I had missed it. Sleep inside the ring. Do not break it for any voice. The thing outside the door began to hum. I recognized the tune immediately. It was the lullaby my mother used to sing while washing dishes, absent-mindedly, never finishing the last verse because she couldn't remember it. I don't know what shocked me more, that it knew the tune, or that it knew where she used it to stop. The humming moved away from the door, across the porch, down the stairs, around the tower, then farther into the trees, where it spread thin and strange among the trunks until it seemed the whole forest was carrying the melody from one unseen mouth to another. I should have taken that chance to run. Instead, I did what people always do when terror comes with instructions. I organized. I shoved the table against the door, dragged the cot over the etched circle, and cleared it with both arms, sending rotten blankets and mouse-chewed debris skidding across the floor. I found an old box of .38 cartridges in the metal tin, most green with corrosion but a few usable-looking ones beneath. My hands were clumsy from adrenaline, but I managed to reload the revolver. Then I checked the windows. The front panes were clouded but not completely opaque. Through them I could see thick clearing below and flashes of lightning, the support beams scarred with names. The black pines swaying, the rain silvering the rock dawned around the tower at the edge of the light. Figures were beginning to gather. At first I thought they were just tree trunks revealed at intervals by lightning. Then one of them moved. There were 7 of them that I could count, maybe more farther back among the branches. They stood in the clearing with their faces turned up toward the cabin. Their shapes were roughly human but never held the same proportions for more than a moment. One seemed too tall, neck bending at an angle no spine could survive. Another looked child-sized until lightning flashed and showed arms that reached nearly to the ground. One wore what looked like a woman's raincoat, pale yellow with the hood up, but beneath it there was no face, only a darkness full of shifting white gleams like teeth or eyes. Or both. They did not climb the stairs. They only waited, watching. A fresh wave of nausea passed through me, but underneath it, colder and steadier, something else took form. I was not here by accident. The carving of my name outside proved that. The tape in the box proved more. My grandfather had expected this day with the grim certainty of a man preparing a room for an hour he hoped would never arrive. And if he had prepared, then preparation meant survival was possible. I turned the cassette tape over in my hand. for Elias. If IT learns you, do not let IT inside. There was no player in sight. But after a frantic search, I found one shoved beneath the shelf near the stove, a portable tape recorder, yellowed with age, one battery cover missing, wire terminals furred with corrosion. Beside it sat a cardboard box of old batteries, Rapidine wax paper. Most were dead. One pair gave a weak red blink when I snapped them in. The recorder whined when I pressed play. The tape spun, static flooded the cabin, loud enough to make me flinch. Then my grandfather's voice crackled out through years of dust and magnetic decay. If this is playing, then you were stupid enough to come here or unlucky enough to be cowed. He coughed wetly, cleared his throat.
Listen carefully, Elias.
If it knows your name, it will try to teach you the rest of itself. It will show you people you love. It will use the dead first, then the living, then you. Outside, all 7 figures lifted their heads at once on the tape. Grandpa continued, "It does not live in the trees. It lives in the hearing of them, in the part of the mind that turns sound into someone you trust." The old men said the mountain had a throat under it. I don't know if that is superstition, or geology, or hell. I only know there is a place below the North Ridge where every voice you have ever loved comes back wrong. Lightning hit somewhere close enough to blind me. The recorder cut out with a pop. Darkness slammed over the room.
Total darkness.
My flashlight had died in the same instant, as if the strike had sucked the charge from it. For 3 seconds there was only rain and my own ragged breathing. Then, from every wall of the cabin at once, from the floorboards, the ceiling, the window glass, the gap beneath the door, the figures gathered below, and the forest beyond them, my own voice began to speak, not yelling, not whispering, speaking in the calm tone I use when I'm trying to tell the truth. I let it in. Something moved in the dark inside the cabin with me. The thing in the darkness took one step toward me. I heard the floorboard groan under its weight, then another. The cabin was black in the purest way, storm black. Mountain black, the kind that erased distance and shape and left only sound. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I couldn't see the etched ring on the floor, the door, the windows, or the revolver I knew IWA still holding because my fingers had cramped around it so hard they ached. But I could hear it. A wet, deliberate shift of weight. A faint brush against the wall. The hush of breath that might not have been breath at all. And still, from every side of me, my own voice kept speaking in that calm, awful tone. I let it in. Different angle. I let it in. My mouth opened before I knew what I was doing. I bit my tongue hard enough to draw blood. The taste flooded my mouth, hot and metallic. Rule 1. Rule 4. Don't answer. Never speak your full name. Don't let it shape the air around your voice. The floorboard groaned again, this time just beyond where the ring should have been. I dropped to one knee, groping with my free hand until my fingertips found the carved grooves in the wood. The circles were still there, cut deep, blackened with whatever my grandfather had used to seal them. I dragged myself fully inside the ring, every nerve in my body screaming at the blind need to move faster outside it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Rain battered the roof. The whole tower shivered under wind. Somewhere outside, one-offed figures in the clearing gave a thin, almost human whine. Like a dog dreaming in pain, then a hand touched the floor beside the ring. I heard the nails click against wood. It did not cross the carved line. My heart slammed so hard it felt structural, like the tower itself was pounding through me. Another hand found the floor, then knees. It was crouching there in the dark, just beyond the circle, lowering itself until I could hear the faint pull and release of its body against the boards. The smell rolled over me all at once, wet bark, stagnant water, flowers gone sweet with rot, and my own voice, inches from my face now, whispered, "You're safe in there." The cruelty of hearing myself say that nearly broke me. I lashed out blindly with the revolver. The barrel struck something soft and wrong. Not flesh. Something like soaked leather stretched over bundled sticks. It jerked back with a hiss so sharp and sudden I almost fired B reflex. A scraping sound followed as it retreated across the room, quick as a spider. Too many points of contact on the floor at once. Lightning flashed through the windows. For a single white frame of time. I saw it. It was on the wall above the stove. Not standing. Attached. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles. Elbows and knees cocked backward, fingers splayed wide in the cracks between boards. The body was long and skin-thin, white-gray, hairless, slick with rain. It had no clothes, but there were shapes beneath the skin that looked like impressions of clothes creases, collars. A fluttering himaz if appearance had been pressed into it and left there. Its face was half-formed, shifting even as I looked at it, like soft wax kneaded from the inside. My mother's mouth, my eye, a child's chin.
My grandfather's cheekbones.
Nothing settled. Only the teeth were constant. Too many, very small, crowded close together behind lips that never quite fit over them. Then the lightning was gone, darkness dropped back over everything. Something landed outside on the porch roof with a bang that shook the cabin. The tower swayed. The tape recorder skidded off the table and hit the floor, and by some miracle Thetian batteries kicked once more. Static erupted, then my grandfather's voice returned in mid-sentence, warped and thin. If it enters the tower before dawn, burn the names. I lunged toward the sound, still on my knees, and caught the recorder with one hand. Static shrieked, then steadied.
Listen to me, my grandfather said.
It cannot fully become what it has not taken below. It mimics from hearing. It wears grief like skin. But there is a root to it, a place. The old shaft under the North Ridge. The men sealed it after the collapse in 1931, after the first watchman began answering voices from underground. A loud crack interrupted him, wood splitting somewhere below the cabin. One of the outer support beams had given a little more down the tape. He coughed again, struggling for breath. If your name appears here before you arrive, then it has heard you in your life already. Through walls, through water, through sleep, maybe through blood. I believe Clarice escaped it only halfway. If you are her son, then God forgive me. It may have been listening to you since before you were born. I closed my eyes. The knocking in my apartment walls, the whisper from the vent, my mother crying during storms, the way she used to stop in the middle of conversations, head tilted, as if someone in another room had spoken. Random, not nerves, not grief. The idea was so monstrous in its intimacy that for a second I couldn't process it. Horror you find in a forest is one thing. Horror that has been sitting in your family photos all your life, just outside the frame, is another. The recorder hissed again. There was a ritual before there were rangers, Grandpa said. Older than the lookout, older than the town. They used to carve the names of the called into the tower so The Mountain would hear wood instead of flesh. A bargain, a delay, not a cure. But delays matter. Outside, the gathered figures began making noise together. Not speech. Not yet. Breathing. 7 separate chests drawing air in and out in perfect rhythm. The sound rose around the tower like a tide. Grandpa's voice thinned, then sharpened once more. If dawn is too far and it has entered the cabin, go to the mouth before sunrise. Bring fire, bring the names, and whatever it says to you in the dark, whatever face it wears, do not let it convince you that mercy and surrender are the same thing. The tape clicked. Silence, then the batteries died completely. I stayed crouched inside the ring. The dead recorder clutched against my chest while the breathing outside the tower continued. In, out, a chorus without lungs. I didn't know how long I knelt there before the next lightning flash came.
Long enough for my knees to numb.
Long enough for the thing inside the cabin to move again, this time. When the world flashed white, it was no longer on the wall. It was crouched beside the window looking out. Its spine rose in a ridge beneath the skin. Water ran from its shoulders to the floor. And its face had almost become mine. Not perfectly. Close enough to stop the heart. My brow, my beard shadow, the slant of my nose, but stretched too thin, as though my reflection had been left in water until it bloated and drifted apart. Its jaw unhinged a little as it turned toward me, and in a voice that was nearly terrifyingly my own, it said, "She never told you what happened here." Lightning died. Darkness again. I swallowed blood and fear together. Don't a single word left my mouth before I could stop it. Instantly the room changed. Not physically at first. Something subtler. A pressure shift, like the moment before altitude makes your ears pop. The darkness seemed to lean closer. Outside, the synchronized breathing ceased. The entire forest held still. The thing smiled in the dark with my mouth. One word spoken. That was all it had wanted. A floorboard behind me creaked. clicked inside the ring. I spun so hard I nearly fell, firing once into the black without thought. The gunshot blinded me in orange. For the split second of muzzle flash, I saw a figure kneeling directly opposite him within the carved circle. A boy, 8, maybe 9 years old. Rhine dark hair, thin shoulders, old green sweater, my sweater. It was me, as memory paints childhood, but exactly as I had been, front tooth chipped, left ear slightly bent from a bicycle fall, knees muddy. Eyes huge with the animal terror children feel before they have language for it. The bullet passed through the place where his chest should have been and punched splinters from the wall beyond. He did not flinch. He only looked at me with the expression I had seen in old school photos. Solemn, watchful, trying hard not to cry. Then the flash was gone and the dark returned, but he was still there. I could hear him breathing. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. My childhood voice, not mimicked from outside, not thrown from a wall. It was right in front of me, inside thereing Drool 5 came back with nauseating force. "If you see yourself among the trees, leave the place you are standing and do not look back." But this wasn't among the trees. This was inside the only protection I had, unless that was the point. I edged backward, hands trembling so badly the revolver barrel clicked softly against my teeth when I tried to hold it steady. "You're not real," I said, and hated myself at once for giving the cabin another piece of my voice. The child version of me tilted his head. "I am the part that heard it first." A flash of memory struck so hard I gasped. I was 6, standing at the bathroom door while my mother brushed my hair after a bath. The window was cracked open to let steam out. Rain outside. The smell of soap. And from somewhere beyond the house, from the storm drains maybe, or the ditch by the road, or no her at all, a voice calling softly through the weather. Delias Dye had smiled because I thought it was a game. My mother's brush had stopped mid-stroke. "Don't answer that," she said. Her voice had been sharp enough to frighten me. I had forgotten it completely until now. Or maybe it had been. "Kept from me." The boy in the ring took one step closer. I scrambled to the edge of the carved lines and nearly crossed them before catching myself. Outside the circle, something moved fast along the floorboards in response, eager as if the ring were a lip and I had nearly leaned over it. The boy crouched, bringing his face level with mine. His skin looked damp, not with rain but with sweat. His pupils were too wide. "She brought you here once," he whispered. "You were asleep in the truck. She thought if she left before dawn it wouldn't hear you properly." Another memory, deeper and uglier, rolled up from whatever cellar I had kept it in. A red plaid blanket.
Headlights cutting through trees.
Waking in the back seat to my mother and grandfather arguing outside the truck in the blue hour before sunrise. "She's here," my mother had said, voice shaking with fury. "Can't you hear her?" Grandpa had answered something I couldn't make out. Then my mother had cried, "He's just a child." I remembered turning my head toward the window and seeing, between the trees, a little girl in a pale dress standing barefoot on wet needles. I had thought she was lost when she raised her face to the glass. It had been my mother's face as a child. I had screamed so hard I vomited. For years, everyone called it a night terror. The boy inside the ring looked at me with a kind of pity I could not bear. "It tasted you then," he said. Outside, the figures around the tower began tapping the support beams not randomly, but in a pattern. 3 taps low, 2 high, 3 low, 2 high. The wood answered with little groans and splinters. Testing. Learning Dye pressed both palms against my eyes until sparks bloomed in the dark. This was what I'd wanted. To flood me with memory until I lost any sense of boundary between then and now. Between what had happened and what it wished had happened. But beneath the panicanather thought was hardening. If the old shaft was the root, then the tower was only an ear. And ears could be deafened. I lowered my hands. The boy was gone. In his place, kneeling just inside the ring, was my mother. Not the half-formed face from the wall. Her. Precisely as she had looked the summer before the cancer took all the softness from her. Dark hair tied back. Raincoat unzipped over a blue sweater. A small white scar by her eyebrow from the time I accidentally hit her with a toy truck. Her eyes wet and frightened in that familiar way that always made me want to comfort her. Even as a child, she looked exhausted. Eli, she whispered. The use of the old nickname almost broke my spine from the inside. No one had called Meth that in years. She held out her hands. They shook.
I know what it is, she said.
I know what it showed you, but I'm here now. Behind her, just beyond the ring, I could hear the thing on the floor dragging itself slowly closer in a circle, patient, letting this scene play. I stared at her and said nothing. I didn't die all the way, she said. The sentence was so monstrous, so perfectly calibrated to grief that I nearly laughed. Instead, I started crying. Silent, furious tears. My mother saw the more the thing wearing her died, and its expression deepened into aching tenderness. That's right, she said softly. There you are. It wanted my recognition more than anything, not words. Recognition, to be seen as true. I tried to stay away from you, she went on. That's why I never told you. That's Wistorm's made me. She swallowed. I thought if I ignored it, it would never learn you completely. Something in the phrasing caught me, emotional. Structural, my mother, real mother, never said learn you. That was Grandpa's language. The notebook's language. The towers. The thing had been listening to him for too long. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. What happened in 1968? It hesitated, just a second, long enough. Then she answered. We came here because the support beam beneath the cabin gave with a brutal crack. One of the figures outside had thrown itself against it. The whole room lurched left. The stove skidded. The table slammed against the door. Glass burst outward from one of the windows and freezing rain sprayed inside, below the tower. Something shrieked, not in pain, in triumph. My mother's face turned toward the broken window, and for one instant the skin around her jaw loosened. Too many teeth pressed through. I fired. The shot hit her in the shoulder. Instead of blood, a black slurry splashed across the ring and steamed faintly where it struck the carved grooves. The figure screamed, not with my mother's voice now, but with a rising blend of many voices tearing free of one another at ounce. It flung itself backward out of the circle and hit the far wall so hard the boards bowed. The ring flared, not with light exactly, but with a dull reddish heat that raced along the knife cuts in the floorboards. A smell like burned hair filled the cabin. The thing writhed at the edge of it, its face collapsing and reforming in frantic sequence. My mother, the child version of me, my grandfather, a stranger, me again, something eyeless, something with bark splitting through the cheeks. Then, just as suddenly, it stilled and smiled with a mouth too wide for any face at all. You finally remember, it said. The voice was none of ours. It was deeper than gender. Old and wet and resonant in a way that made the walls seem tones were it from inside their grain. The figures below struck the support beams again. All together this time, the tower pitched hard enough that I was thrown from the ring. My shoulder hit the floor. The revolver skidded out of reach. The thing moved instantly. It came off the wall, across the room and onto me in a blur of white joints and reeking skin. Its weight was wrong, both light and crushing. As if several bodies were layered, Tojatharand couldn't agree on mass. One hand clamped over my mouth. Another pinned my chest. The face above mine rippled from one familiar shape to another so fast I almost vomited. Then it settled on my face, perfectly. I stared up at myself, grinning inches away. It is easier, it said in my own voice, when you stop pretending you were ever separate. Outside. Wood began to tear. Not a beam this time, the stairs. The thing on top of me turned its head toward the sound. Almost curious, from below came a new voice. Old and cracked and unmistakable even through rain and thunder. My grandfather. Elias! The creature froze, and in that instant, from the broken stairwell door beneath the cabin, something started climbing up from inside the tower. The thing wearing my face lifted its head. For the first time since I had entered Raven Watch, it seemed uncertain. Rain drove through the broken window in silver sheets. The tower groaned around us, one whole side sagging now, the support beams below taking the pounding of those impossible figures in the clearing. My shoulder burned where I'd hit the floor. The taste of blood and cordite sat hot in my mouth. And above me, pinning me with too many hands in the shape off too, was my own face, my eyes, my mouth, my expression staring down with a kind of fascinated hatred. Then my grandfather's voice rose again from below. Elias, don't look at it. The creature on top of me recoiled so violently that for a second its features tore sideways, as if my face had been stitched onto something that moved too fast beneath it. I twisted hard, got one arm free, and drove my elbow into what should have been its throat. There was no throat. My elbow sank into a yielding place full of shifting parts. The thing let out a sound like air being sucked through reeds and sprang backward to the wall, clinging there once more at an angle no human spine could survive. My grandfather appeared in the doorway beneath cabin floor a heartbeat later, climbing through the broken stairwell hatch like a corpse that had refused instruction. For one impossible second I thought the mountain had sent me another imitation. Then lightning filled the cabin, and I saw him clearly. He was dead, not in the theatrical way stories do it, not fresh from the grave with dramatic rot and bright eyes. He looked like a man who had been laid out, buried, and then made to stand up again because something older than death had unfinished business. He wore the same dark suit we had buried him in, but it hung wrong now, soaked and earth-stained from the knees down. Mud streaked his sleeves. Pine needles clung to one shoulder. The right side of his face had sunk slightly where the embalmer's work had failed against time and weather, and the flesh at his neck was gray with the bruised stiffness of the grave, but his eyes were himself tired. Fierce. Afraid for me. Toddy held a road flare in one hand, its red light seething through the rain like a wound. An akin of kerosene in the other. The thing on the wall hissed and drew back from the flare. Down my grandfather looked from it to me, and in that ruined face I saw all at once the old man from my childhood, the old man in the casket, and something far more exhausted than either. "You took too long," he said. I was too stunned to answer. He threw me the flare. I caught it clumsily. Heat licked my knuckles. Crimson light flooded the cabin and the creature recoiled farther, its skin tightening into ridges as though the color itself hurt it. The figures outside the tower began shrieking, not one by one, all together. A single sound through many mouths. My grandfather crossed the room with the strange, stiff economy of a body no longer fully obeying life. He snatched the notebook from the floor and shoved it into my chest. "Can you still run?" "Yes," I heard myself say. "Good. Then listen carefully because you won't get another chance." He unscrewed the kerosene cap with trembling fingers and splashed the floorboards. The wallies, the carved names, the broken cot, the table jammed against the door. The sharp oil smell cut through the sweet rot of the creature. On the wall, the thing smiled with my face and said in my mother's voice, "Martin, you always come back." He didn't look at it. "To the North Ridge," he said. "There's an old mine shaft sealed under the rocks. That's Themouth. The tower only listens. The shaft below repeats, but the root is deeper." Another support beam below the cabin cracked like a rifle shot. The whole room listed hard. Through the broken window I saw one of the things in the clearing stumble sideways and rise again on too many limbs. Yellow raincoat hanging from a body that changed shape under it. I stared at my grandfather. "You're dead." "Yes." The simplicity of the answer almost undid me. He splashed more kerosene across the names on the wall. Some of them were cut so deeply the oil ran black from them. "I burned myself in the watchman's stove in 1972, he said. Or that's what the count I believed. Easier than telling them the mountain had started using my daughter's voice. His mouth twitched, not a smile, not remotely. "I thought I could starve it if I died before it learned the rest of the family. But death is another kind of hearing here." The thing on the wall began to peel itself away. Not climbing now, unfolding. Bones or things like bones shifted under its skin with soft cracking sounds. My grandfather raised his voice over the storm. "Elias, it can imitate what it hears. But it becomes strongest with what is willingly remembered. That's why it shows you the dead. That's why it digs in grief." The mine collapsed before the town was founded. They dug through something old and hollow. After that, people began hearing loved ones from underground. Children answering voices in wells. Men walking into shafts because their wives were calling from inside the rock. The tribes here had already known the place. They marked the ridge and kept names away from it. The settlers named it Superstition and dug anyway. The creature dropped to the floor, landing soundlessly on all fours. Dot's face changed from mine to my mother's to the little boy version of me and then back again. "Don't," it said softly now, pleading. "Please don't make him hear the last part." My grandfather went still. Something in his face cracked wider than death. I felt the air in the cabin change. The creature knew a wound in him I didn't. "Grandpa," I said. He closed his eyes once, briefly, then opened them. Your grandmother didn't die off favor." The words landed with the dead thud of a truth that had waited decades for daylight. The creature rose slowly upright. My grandmother's face began to bloom across it like mold through plaster, young at first. Beautiful in the stern old photograph's way, the older, gaunter eyes wide with terror. "She called to me from below the ridge," my grandfather said. His voice was flattening, no, not from lack of feeling, but from too much. "I heard her at dawn after the first collapse. We had only been married 5 months. I thought she was trapped under the rock. I followed the voice into the shaft before the rescue men were ready. By the time they pulled me out, there was no second voice anymore. No body. No sign she had ever been in there at all." The creature stepped closer. "She was in there," it whispered in my grandmother's voice. "You left too soon." My grandfather's dead hand shook so violently kerosene sloshed down his sleeve. "That is how it opened me, with love and guilt tied together so tightly I could never separate them." The thing smiled with her mouth. "You still can't." For the first time, my grandfather looked at it, drearily looked, and I saw the cost of that in him immediately. His posture changed. His expression loosened. Some old hunger, some ruinously old hope, passed through his face like a knife through wet cloth. "Elena," he whispered. The creature inhaled sharply, the red flare dimmed in my hand outside. The shrieking stopped, every figure in the clearing went still. I understood then what the tower had been for all these years. Not just a listening post. Adam. A place where names could be cut into wood and held a little while longer before being called below. My grandfather had not built a warning here. He had manned a border until death itself failed to release him from the post. The creature took another step. "Martin," it said in my grandmother's voice, and even I almost believed it. There was so much ordinary ache in that one word. So much fatigue and tenderness and accusation. "Please. It's so dark down there." My grandfather's face folded inward with grief so naked I had to look away. And that was when I saw, on the page of the notebook still clutched against my chest, a final passage I had missed. Written in dense lines at the very back, as if added in terror and haste. "If IT takes the face you least wish to doubt. Herd IT to kindness feeds IT to grief feeds IT to only rejection makes IT show its bones." The last word was carved so hard the paper had torn. I moved before I could think. I ran at the creature and slammed the flare against its shoulder. It screamed out, not with any human voice. The sound that tore out of it was subterranean, like pressure escaping a cavern sealed for centuries. Fire hissed across its skin in greasy orange veins. The face of my grandmother burst apart into mine, my mother's, a stranger's. A child's, then something eyeless and bark-skinned. It hit me with one arm. I flew sideways into the table. Pain flashed white through my ribs. The revolver clattered somewhere near the stove. The flare stayed in my hand by luck or desperation. My grandfather moved with a suddenness that belonged to neither age nor death. He hurled the rest of the kerosene directly onto the creature. Liquid splashed across its chest and the floor beneath it. For a moment, the whole room held still around the possibility. Then lightning flashed. The creature lunged for me, and my grandfather struck a match on the sole of his shoe. The fire took the cabin all at once. It went up the walls in red sheets, raced along the carved names, leapt from floorboard Tockertonless window frame to roof beam in a roar so immediate it felt alive. Heat punched air from my lungs. Smoke ballooned down from the rafters in black folds. The thing in middle of the room convulsed, every stolen face surfacing and melting away in rapid succession. Dozens of voices shrieked from one burning throat. The figures outside answered. They came at the tower together. The supports exploded under impact. One of the windows burst inward. Hands, two mana hands, too long, jointed wrong, reached through the flames. The whole lookout lurched so hard the floor became a wall for one terrible second. I grabbed a beam. My grandfather seized the back of my coat. "Move!" We crashed through the broken window and out onto the rain-slick roof of the lower stairwell just as the cabin above began to collapse. Burning boards rained around us. The tower screamed in old iron and split wood. Below, in the red and black stormlight, things from the clearing swarmed over the supports, not climbing like animals, not like people, but surging upward as though the forest floor itself had grown limbs and decided to climb. My grandfather shoved me toward the rocky slope behind the tower. "The notebook," he shouted. I still had it. "The names are in there. all the marked ones. Take it to the mouth, burn what's left where it can hear itself choke. What about you? Even then, stupid question. But I asked it. He looked back once at the burning tower, and in the flame-struck planes of his ruined face I saw something almost like peace. It has heard me enough. Then one of the figures reached him. It came over the shattered railing in a blur of limbs and teeth, yellow raincoat flapping open over a ribbed white torso. My grandfather turned, drove both hands into it, and Tojderthi fell back into the fire. I screamed his name, but the storm took it. The tower folded in on itself. Flame blew upward in a fountain of sparks and black smoke. Something huge and Manavoy shrieked from inside the collapse, a sound that made the trees shake loose theron. The swarm of figures convulsed around the wreckage, some burning, some tearing at beams, some simply standing in the downpour with faces tipped upward as if listening to instructions from underground. Then the earth beneath the north ridge answered. A sound rolled through the mountain, not thunder, not collapse, but an opening. A deep stone inhalation from somewhere beyond the trees. All the figures froze. Heads turned north in unison toward the mouth. I ran. There was no trail, only wet rock roots and black timber slick with rain. Branches lashed me face. Mud grabbed at my boots. The notebook thudded against my chest under my coat. Behind me through the forest I heard them coming, not crashing, not hunting by scent, but converging with terrible certainty. Like words returning to the mouth that foremet them, the north ridge rose steep and crooked. Lightning gave it to me in fragments. A wall off mossy stone, cedars bent by old storms, a dry creek bed, then a wedge-shaped cut in Thearth half hidden by fallen rock and bramble. The sealed shaft. The entrance was no more than a black seam in the hillside. Maybe 6 feet across where the collapse had once broken it open and later hands had tried to bury it again. Old timbers jutted from the rubble like rotten teeth. Rusted rails disappeared into the dark. Around the opening, nailed to trees and driven into cracks in the rock, were dozens of small tokens gone black with jantlers, shoes, bones wrapped in twine, river stones marked with symbols, bits of rusted cutlery, hair braided with red thread, offerings, warnings, bargains. And from inside the shaft, from a darkness deeper than the storm, came a voice I had wanted all my life to hear one more time. My mother. Not frightened now, not pleading. Warm. Eli, she called softly, you're almost home. I stopped at the threshold. Rain ran down my face. My chest heaved so hard I thought I might faint. Behind me, somewhere in the forest, branches snapped under the weight of many approaching bodies. Ahead of me, the mine breathed out air that smelled of wet stone, old timber. And graves opened in spring. My mother's voice came again, closer this time, from somewhere just past the fallen beams. I remember the rest of the lullaby, she said, and then, impossibly beautifully, she began to sing the verse she had never sung in life. My mother had never sung the last verse because there was no last verse. Not in any version I had ever heard. Not in our house. Not in the half-remembered family hymn she carried from room to room while folding laundry or washing dishes, or standing at a stove with rain on the windows. She always stopped at the same place, smiling a little to herself, and say, "That's all I know." So when the voice inside the shaft sang on past that point softly, tenderly, with the same cadence and warmth she used to use while tucking blankets under my chin, I knew 2 things at once. The first was that whatever waited below had been with us longer than memory. The second was that it had finally run out of reasons to hide it, the words drifting from the dark were in no language I knew. They sounded almost like English heard through a wall, not quite spoken, not quite sung. The melody held, but the syllables beneath it twisted wrong in the throat, thick and wet and old. Something in them made the hairs rise along my arms. It wasn't just that they were unnatural. It was that some buried part of me strained toward them in recognition, as if I had heard them once before, as if all my life I had been forgetting them on purpose. Behind me the forest moved, not chaotically, not with the scattered panic of animals or the reckless crash of pursuers. It moved in formation, converging on the mouth from all sides. Branches bent. Dark trunks flickered past in lightning. Pale shapes passed between the trees and were gone. The mountain was herding its voices back toward its throat. I stood at the edge of the collapsed shaft with the notebook under my arm. The flare guttering low in my hand, rain hissing on the rocks around me. Then the voice inside said, in perfect English and in my mother's exact tone, you know it isn't really me. The honesty of that almost hurt more than the lie. Then why use her voice? I asked. My words vanished into the shaft and came back smaller. Because after everything that had happened, after all the rules and warnings and imitations, I still wanted an answer. Not escape, not comfort, not even survival, not in that moment, just the truth. The mind breathed. Water dripped somewhere far below, each drop carrying its own impossible delay. The darkness beyond the first fallen beams seemed to bend inward instead of away, as if distance inside the shaft obeyed different instructions than the world outside it. Then the voice answered, because it opens you. Simple as that, plain. No threat in it. No malice. The way a surgeon might explain where the knife needs to go. Figures began appearing at the tree line, the yellow raincoat first, hanging from a tall, slack-limbed shape. Then a woman-sized silhouette with arms too long and a neck that leaned wrong. Then something child small stepping barefoot over the stones with its head bowed. More behind them. 7 became 12. 12 became a crowd half obscured by rain and black timber. None of them rushed me. They formed a ragged semicircle around the shaft and waited. The burning tower behind the trees still stained the clouds a faint red, but its light was fading. The storm was beginning to exhaust itself. Thunder moved farther away. Night then by degrees so subtle I only knew dawn was coming because the black between the branches was turning the color of bruised steel. I looked down at the notebook. The pages were swollen, spotted with rain and soot and my own fingerprints. Near the back, among the final entries, my grandfather had copied the names carved into the tower wall over the years.
Dates.
Notations. Sometimes only a single line beside them. Dancered at creek. Followed singing. Seen twice before taken. Left town. Returned in winter. Never found body. Still heard after burial. The list went on and on. Not a few lost hikers. Not a local legend with a handful of tragedies pinned to it for shape. A pattern. A system of hunger stretching across decades, maybe longer. Families. Bloodlines. The same surnames recurring like a fever that skipped generations and then came home. The first page of names was recent by comparison. The last page was oldest, and at the bottom of that oldest page, written in a tighter, shakier hand than the rest, almost as if copied from something far more ancient, was a note I had not yet read. The first bargain was this: give the mountain the name in wood, or it will take the name in flesh. Below that, the second bargain was worse. When the wood runs out, blood must answer. I stared at the words until the meaning turned and faced me. Curse drifting through a family at random. Debt. My mother had been carved into the tower as a child. My grandfather had burned himself to hold the line longer. IA had been written there before I arrived. Expected. Not merely chosen. From inside the shaft, my mother's voice said gently, he knew he could not keep paying forever. I shut the notebook.
No, I said.
He thought he could keep it from me. A small silence followed. Then, with a note almost like admiration, yes. The figures around the clearing shifted closer by a single pace. The one in the yellow raincoat lifted its head. Beneath the hood there was still no fixed face, only a pale churn of almost features. Yet I knew, with the certainty nightmares give, that if I let myself stare long enough I would see someone I loved there. Maybe Severalsamayones. Maybe myself. The voice from the shaft spoke again, no longer pretending to be only my mother. Other tones moved beneath it now. My grandfather.
My own.
A child. An old woman. Many dead throats braided into one patient, wet harmony. You think of me as hunger, it said. That is a human word. I am closer to memory than hunger, closer to echo. I am what remains when calling does not end. I laughed once despite myself, a harsh, exhausted sound. That sounds like something that wants to be forgiven. No, it said. Understood. That was the worst answer it could have given, because evil that only howls is easy to hate. Evil that explains itself, that places its cold hand on the machinery of grief and says, see, this is how we fit. That is harder. That stains more deeply. I don't care what you are, I said. You took them. The raincoat figure twitched. The voice corrected me.
No.
I answered them, and suddenly I could see how it believed that. Men hearing wives in mine shafts. Children hearing brothers by creeks. Mothers hearing sons in storms. The mountain had not dragged its victims by the ankle. It had called through the open places in them and waited for the step no one could resist. It didn't think of itself as a predator. It thought of itself as a door. That did not make it less monstrous. It made it older. From deeper in the forest came a new sound, boots on stone. Slow. Firm. Human rhythm. I turned. A woman stood between two cedars. Barely visible through the rain. My heart stopped so hard it seemed to fold in half. She was perhaps 35, dark hair braided over one shoulder, wearing a wool coat darkened by water. Her face was pale, stern, and painfully beautiful in the severe way of old photographs. I knew her immediately without ever having met her. My grandmother, Elena. Because the thing had chosen her face before, but because this was different. Their cognition that hit me now was not sharpened by longing. It arrived with an almost domestic certainty, the way one knows a relative by shared bone structure. By a familiar habit of standing. She did not approach the shaft. She did not look at the gathered figures around it. She looked only at me, then in a voice that did not echo, did not overlap, did not contain anyone else. She said, "It can't cross a refusal, it truly hears." The voice in the mind went silent. The figures around the clearing bent toward her all at once. I took a step in her direction before I could stop myself. Don't ask what I am," she said sharply. "There isn't time." Her gaze flicked to the notebook in my arm, then to the mouth of the shaft. The tower was never enough. Your grandfather knew that. He was trying to buy a daunt that lasted longer than a day. A shape moved behind her among the trees. Then another. Not the white, jointed things from the clearing. These were dimmer, more translucent, as if the rain itself were remembering outlines. Human forms. A man with one sleeve torn away. A little girl holding on shoe. A hunter in an old cap. Men and women from different decades, perhaps different centuries. Standing between the trunks with the stillness of photographs, the names dawned, or what remained of them. My grandmother saw me looking. "It keeps what answers," she said. "But not all of what answers belongs to it forever." The voice from the shaft came back at once, low and resonant and dangerous now that its patience had thinned. "You were given back only because he begged." Something changed in her face, not fear, not shame, but fury preserved so long it had become a form of clarity. "He begged because he loved," she said. "You only imitate that." The shaft exhaled. The old timbers around the entrance began to tremble. Pebbles skipped down the rubble slope and vanished into the dark. From somewhere deep below came a sound like distant rails screaming under enormous weight. The gathered figures closed another step. Dawn was near. I could feel it, though no sun yet touched the trees. The eastern sky beyond the ridge had begun to pale into a cold ash color. The mountain knew it too. I felt its urgency now, not panic, but the tightening of a closing window. I looked from the shaft to my grandmother, to the notebook in my hands. "Tell me what to do." She did not hesitate. "Give it back its hearing." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It learned your family through names cut into wood. Through names spoken in grief, through names carried down blood. The bargain fed its shape. End the bargain." The notebook suddenly felt heavier. The names. All of them. My grandfather had told me to bring fire. Bring the names, burn what's left where it can hear itself choke. I understood then. Not feed the shaft my body. Feed it the record it had been using to listen outward. The tower had been a dam, yes, but also a conduit. A ledger. The mountain had been hearing people through the names preserved in wood and ink, learning the contours of each family and each grief until mimicry became inheritance. Burn the names at the mouth. And maybe the echo would turn inward. Maybe. That was all I was going to get. The voice from below must have understood too, because the figures around the clearing changed all at once. No more waiting. No more patient semicircle. They began to advance. I ripped pages from the notebook. Rain slapped them from my hands immediately. But I crouched over the shaft entrance and struck the dying flare against the paper until the corner caught. Orange crawled across the first page, blackening ink, curling names into ash. The response from below was immediate. The mind screamed. Not from one depth, but from many. Women. Children. 1,000 swallow-head throats all tearing open together beneath the earth. The sound hit with enough force to drop me to one knee. Around the clearing, the white-limbed figures convulsed. The thing in the yellow raincoat clutched its hood with both hands as if trying to hold a face in place beneath it. I fed more pages to the fire. The flames brightened, greedy now despite the rain, as if the names themselves wanted burning. Ash spiraled down into the shaft. The old timbers shook harder. From deep underground came a series of brutal impacts, like doors slamming one after another in a descending chain. The approaching figures broke into a run. My grandmother stepped between them and me. She did not raise her hands, did not chant or command. She simply stood in their path and said one word with terrible ringing force: no. Everything stopped. Not forever. Not. But enough. Their bodies distorted on contact with empty air. Faces surfaced and sank. Hands reached. Teeth flashed. But they could not cross the line her voice had made. She turned to me, already thinning at the edges like mist and wind. Faster. I tore page after page from the notebook and fed them into the flame. My grandfather's careful notations. Blackened. Dates curled. Surnames burst into sparks. The pale ink of my own entry blistered and vanished with every page. The shaft howled louder. The ground beneath the entrance trembled under my knees. Rocks shifted. One of the rusted rails bent upward with a shriek. That smell rising from the dark changed from stone and wet timber to something old and sealed to long-grave gas. Stagnant water, minerals dragged up from the closed lungs of Thearth. Half the notebook was gone. Then from below my mother spoke again. Not from above. Not in the trees. Not braided with others. From directly beneath the shaft mouth, as if she stood one floor down in the dark. Eli. My hand stopped. It was her real voice this time. I knew it the way you know your own heartbeat in the dark. Not because it was sweet or familiar. Because it carried all the little truths imitation never gets right. The breath catching faintly on the first syllable, the fatigue she always carried after chemotherapy, the tinny roughness in her throat from the years she tried to quit smoking. I leaned forward before I could stop myself. Mama? The clearing around me vanished. The rain vanished. Even fear vanished. For one lethal second I was only a son hearing his mother one room away. I'm here, she said. Something moved in the shaft below, subtle, human-sized, not the swelling wrongness I had imagined. I saw nothing clearly, only a paler darkness among dark. Tears blurred my vision. You have to listen carefully, she said. There isn't much of me left that can speak against it. The voice in the deeper shaft roared in protest. Timbers split. The ground jumped. Hurry, my grandmother said, but I could barely hear her. My mother's voice continued, and every word felt pulled through pain. It didn't take me all at once. Not when I was little. Not later. It lived in the places I was afraid to talk about. In the things I kept from you. Because I thought silence was protection, that's how it lasts. In what families bury and call love. I was shaking so hard I could hardly hold the burning pages. Can I get you out? The question came from childhood, not adulthood. From the part of me that still believed enough suffering, enough wanting. Enough courage could reverse the structure of loss. To pause then with such tenderness it split me open, no. I closed my eyes. The answer was mercy, not for her. For me. It wants you to make grief into obedience, she said. Don't do that for anyone, not even me. Behind me, the barrier made by my grandmother's refusal began to crack. One of the advancing shapes pushed an arm through and lost half of it in the attempt. The severed limb writhed on the rocks like a blind eel, then liquefied into black runoff. Another face surfaced from the yellow raincoat hood, mine this time, weeping. My grandmother was fading faster now. Her outline thinned with the rain. Through her shoulder I could see the gray trees. Elias, she shouted. My mother spoke one last time, and now her voice came from very far below, dropping away. It only knows your name if you answer to it. I opened my eyes. The final pages of the notebook were in my hands. On the very last one, in my grandfather's hand, was a single unfinished line. If it comes to blood, let the line end with you know, period. No explanation. Only that. I fed the page to the fire. The shaft opened. There is no other way to say it. The earth at the mouth did not merely collapse it wide like a throat trying to vomit. The rocks around the entrance buckled outward. The old timbers snapped and flew. A rush of air blasted from below so violently it blew me backward across the stones. And from inside the widening black came every voice the mountain had ever stored. All of them at once, surging upward in one appalling tide. My mother, children, lovers, strangers, my own voice in 10 different ages. All calling, all pleading, all naming. The gathered figures around the clearing ruptured. That is the only word for it. Their borrowed human forms tore open like wet paper around something that had never needed limbs in the first place. The white bodies split and tossed streaming threads of darkness and sound that whipped toward the shaft, dragged not by gravity but by recognition, by a deeper summons turning inward at last. The yellow raincoat collapsed empty. The child shape burst apart into a flock of black scraps that screamed Asthi flew. Faces surfaced in the torrent and were gone. My grandmother looked at me once, for the first and only time. She smiled. Then she too was taken, not torn, not swallowed, but released. Her outline lifted into the storm like breath on cold air, and for an instant I thought I saw dozens of other human shapes rising with her from the trees, from the rocks, from the very edges of the shaft's roar. Nami Zen hooking, echoes returning to whatever silence had been denied them. The mountain gave one final terrible cry, and the mouth collapsed. Stone thundered inward. Earth folded. Timbers vanished in a storm of rubble and ash. The roosted rails snapped and disappeared. A crack raced up the slope through root and moss and old offerings, then sealed under its own landslide. Sound cut off so suddenly my ears rang with the absence of it. Then there was only rain. Gray dawn spread over the ridge. No figures stood at the tree line. No voices called from the dark. No breathing answered from below. I lay on my back among wet stones and burnt paper until the rain eased and the first morning birds began. Tentative and unbelieving from somewhere lower in the forest, it took me hours to make my way down the mountain. Or maybe days. Time had become difficult. My watch was broken. My phone never found signal until I reached the highway, and by then the screen showed a date 2 days later than it should have been. Search parties had been organized after hikers found Smoke Earth Ridge. They found me stumbling out near a service road at noon, dehydrated, half delirious, burned lightly on my hands and shoulder. With no notebook and no revolver and no coherent story anyone wanted to print and report. The official account was simple. Old lookout struck by lightning. Wildfire contained by rain. Hiker disoriented and exposed overnight. Possible mine collapse due to erosion under the North Ridge. No bodies recovered. No record of an active shaft in that exact location. No sign. They said of anyone else being there. My sister cried when she saw me in the hospital. My ex-wife held my hand and asked gentle questions I did not answer. The county sheriff, a tired man with a face like folded leather, looked at me for a long time before saying, "Some places up there should stay unnamed." Then he left. I moved out of my apartment 2 weeks later. The knocking in the walls never returned. Storms no longer made me wake at 2:13. Vents no longer whispered. I could pass a dark tree line without feeling something there arranging my memories in Tobe. For a while. I almost believed it was over. Almost. Then in early spring, I went to visit my mother's grave. The cemetery was still damp from thaw, the grass yellow and soft underfoot. I brought fresh flowers and a clean stone for the vase because winter had cracked the old one. I stood there under a low white sky and talked to her the way people do when they know nobody will answer. About my sister. About selling Grandpa's house. About the fact that I had finally remembered the bathroom, the storm, the truck, the girl by the trees. About how sorry I was. The wind moved softly through the cemetery pines. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed was hushed by an adult voice. I set the flowers down and turned to leave. Then I saw the back of her head at the far end of the row. My mother. Standing between two gravestones in her blue sweater. Raincoat unzipped, hair pinnied back the way she wore it before the cancer. My body stopped breathing. She did not turn toward me. She only stood there, facing the trees beyond the cemetery fence. For a long time I did nothing. Then, very carefully, I stepped backward, forward, backward, another step, another. I never took my eyes off her, but I did not call out. Did not say mom. Did not ask if it was really her. Did not offer grief the shape of obedience. The cemetery gate, she lifted one hand, not beckoning, waving. Goodbye. Then the wind moved through the pines again. And she was only shadow and stone and branches crossing branches in the distance. I left. I did not look back. Years have passed now. I have children of my own. When storms come, I close the windows. When they ask why, I tell them weather has a way of making houses sound strange. Nothing more. I do not speak the mountain's name. I do not sing lullabies I cannot finish. I do not let sorrow teach itself my voice, but sometimes, just before sleep, when the house is quiet and everyone I love is breathing softly in their rooms, I feel a pressure in the dark like a listener waiting on the other side off the wall. Not knocking. Not yet. Only listening. And on those nights I lie still and remember the last true thing my mother gave me from beneath the earth. It only knows your name if you answer to it.